All right, welcome back to This is Rob Penny with your host, Rob Penny. I got a good one today. I just finished wrapping up a blog post I wrote. So you'll see I got my notebook here with me, as well as my trusty laptop. And I wanted to go over the video I watched today, which is Tom Bilyeu and Mark Manson. So some of you may know Tom Bilyeu. He runs the Impact Theory YouTube channel, which is fantastic. Huge fan of it. I initially, honestly, started watching it for his guests, and then I started to really enjoy his style more and more. And if you're familiar with Mark Manson, the name maybe not so much, but his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a, is very successful. I mean, tons of awards. It's been around for a while now, so he's kind of really based his whole persona around that. And frankly, I really enjoyed the book, read it a number of years ago, and this podcast was great. So if you're a first-timer, please link and subscribe if you like it. And as always, the returning community, feel free to leave your comments. I'd really like to see what you think about this one. All right, so I'm going to kick it off with the 6 takeaways that I got from this. So it's a little bit more than the normal 3. So the first was there's a point about reverse visualization that I thought was really interesting, Mark made. He also talks about mourning the loss or death of previous identities, which was pretty interesting. Then there was the thought of, pretty interesting, one that was picking your own shit sandwich. So we'll go into that one, but really talking about identifying and choosing your own struggle. There's the thought about the thinking brain versus the feeling brain. There is finding your unknown passion and then talking about that moment when it really clicks. And then lastly, I know, 6, it's a lot, we had was your identity being crafted from emotion and not logic. So those 6 were really some heavy hitters that it's a 45-minute interview, so not super long. Arguably, this video might be just as long as you could just watch the actual thing. But anyway, I'm going to jump into it. So the first one we had was the reverse visualization. So what Mark talks about here is that in a lot of the current self-improvement world, there's a great deal of, let's say, visualizing or vision boards, which I do enjoy, and it seems like he did as well. So talking about put pictures of the house you want, put pictures of boats you want, put pictures of the life you want to live, and then visualize yourself there as a way to get from where you are to where you want to go. But what Mark mentioned was do the opposite. So imagine what it is that you want. So imagine you're a person, in his example, someone who has a fleet of yachts. And then imagine that you don't have them anymore. And talk about what does that do to you as a person? How is your identity? Who are you without it? What does that do to your let's say your value you put on your own life and your self-esteem? So I thought that was a pretty interesting an interesting thought of really making you understand why you want something or what having something will do to you and your future self, what it'll mean to you, and arguably maybe even make you realize before you get it that it might not be what you're chasing. So it wasn't the most important one that I got out of the talk, but I thought it was really interesting. I'd never heard of visualizing the opposite way. So the second one, I think this has to be by far my favorite one, was he talks about mourning the death or loss of your previous identities. So the theory being that there are things that we can carry with us in our lives that maybe we identify with. So Mark's example was being a musician. For many years of his life, formative years, he was a musician, and he went to music school, and he would introduce himself as a musician. That's what he knew himself as. And then at one point, when he eventually quit and left school and decided to pursue Other things, he realized that, wow, who am I without being a musician? Like, he was so used to doing that, he didn't quite know how to introduce himself at first, or who he actually was. Which then leads into the exploratory phase and finding out who he was and who you are. But he just talks about what is it that you could be holding on to that you based your identity around. In my blog post, I talk a lot about myself. Growing up, I grew up riding BMX, X Games style bikes. And yeah, all my friends were in that culture. It's what I did for a decade. It's sort of how I dressed, the music I listened to, everything was really tied off of that. And, I hadn't thought of it before, but yeah, during that time period, and even now, looking back, I would identify as that. And then over the years, whether it happened to be when I was in college and really into fitness and exercise, or there's my job, engineering, construction. There's so many things that over my life I have actually identified or been able to, introduce myself as. And as they fall out, it's, when I think about it, there's a point in time where I feel it's no longer I'm able to include that as part of my identity. And I didn't know it at the time, but it really is sort of a passing of the torch, or a mourning as it goes away. And in my personal opinion, it's been beneficial, because I think you find a way to decide what it is that you want to carry over into your new life or new identity from the old one. Sort of in the way, if you lose a family member or a loved one, you think of, how can I keep their spirit living on inside of me? What is it that you could do to take a bit of them with you? So it's very similar to your previous identity. So just great point. Never heard that before. Mark makes some really good comments about that. One of the favorites, and obviously, it's a catchy tagline, but it talks about picking your own shit sandwich. So Tom really brings this up to talk to Mark about, because he read it in one of his books. But it's basically discussing that when you pursue anything in your life, it's really going to take a lot of effort. And this could be anything you want to do. If you want to start a business, you want to start a blog, you want to start a YouTube channel, you want to build a family, you want to hike a mountain. A lot of the times we can go ahead and look at what will be the value we obtain when we get there, but not a lot of the times do we realize what is the work required to get there. What is that going to take? So that's what they're referring to as the shit sandwich, the effort and the work that you need to put in to get somewhere. The thing I find really interesting about this is that you're creating a why. So you figure out what it is you want to do, but then you specifically realize, okay, this is what it's going to take. Is it worth it? And if you do deem it's worth it and you pick that shit sandwich, then you go ahead and realize, all right, you're buying in from the beginning. So you're going to be less likely to be dissuaded down the road. But it ties in for me to a lot of other things that I've read, or beliefs I carry. The one being that you want to, as much as you can in life, be proactive versus reactive. So you want to choose your own struggle and your own exposure to adversity, as opposed to the world putting it on you. What do I mean by that? Getting up, exercising, taking on new challenges at work, physical activities or adventures, whether it's hiking or climbing for me, or doing a sprint triathlon, or just setting these small goals. The more you can do that yourself and provide something to run towards, being proactive, the less life is going to come at you with things you run from and being reactive. So I thought that was just really interesting, the empowering thought, I would say, the empowering thought behind choosing your own shit sandwich. Ooh, now we're on to 4. We're a little over halfway there. This one, a whole lot here. I dive far into it into the blog article, but talking about that thinking brain versus your feeling brain. So basically that means would be a thinking brain is like your goals, your logic, your reasoning, and then your feeling brain is really heavily your emotions and how you feel about yourself and life. And that Tom and Mark have the discussion of, so for a long time, people have been trying to almost suppress the emotion or the feeling brain and saying, okay, how do we, suppress feelings of sadness, of anger, and be even-keeled and always be on the ball and be, you're not nervous, always steady, versus the idea of actually leveraging those emotions to help your thinking brain out. So the example being that, say you get angry, say you get sad, or say you're happy. Instead of trying to suppress those emotions and just use your logic brain, I'm doing this for this reason. I wake up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym because I want to be physically fit, and that's why I do it. If you go ahead and feel upset about that, or angry about that, or happy about that, to take some time and sit and wonder to yourself, why am I feeling like this? In the example Mark uses, if you feel awful about getting up at 5 a.m. for the gym, and you don't, instead of continuing to get up at 5 a.m. and feeling awful about it, you maybe take a step back and say, okay, well, why is it so bad? You go, well, I just really hate it because it's too early. So you go, okay, feeling brain. What about 6 a.m.? Thinking brain, we can still get everything we need to get done, and it gives you a little bit more time to go to sleep. And then feeling brain goes, you know what? I think I could live on that. So you take those emotions, and instead of suppressing it and leaving yourself at a disadvantage, you're able to acknowledge it and address it and almost solve that problem. So you're leveraging your emotions to make your thinking brain be able to make decisions better. I'm trying to think of another example that would work for, maybe one that resonates with me. I would say one would be anger or sadness. A lot of the times in my past, I've wondered when those comes up, and you can include being anxious as well, just wanting to suppress it. What is wrong? Do I need to exercise more? Do I need to be working more? What is it I need to do? And I found that over the years, the opposite actually helps alleviate it, is take a look at, why am I feeling upset? What is it that's angering me? Is there something I'm not doing during the day that I wish I was doing, so I'm upset with myself at that? Is there something that someone else or something else is doing to me that I'm not speaking up about, so it's not changing? Or is there something that is making me nervous and I'm not properly prepared for it, so I need to be doing more to be prepared for it? So basically, instead of trying to suppress the emotion and avoiding it, I stop and take a look and say, okay, I'm feeling this way for whatever reason. Why might I be? What can I do about it? And how can I once you figure out why it's being caused, to actually do something about that, to leverage your thinking brain into actually doing something logical or attaching it to a goal. So now you've got a super powerful why. So really like that thought, thinking brain versus the feeling brain. There's a whole lot to unpack there. This one was just more like a really good story, but it's called it was like finding your unknown passion. And not so much in the sense of like, oh, let's find what you're passionate, you'll never work a day in your life. It's not so much that. But he talks about a experience that he had when he was in music school. And in particular, he was working really hard. He found it super hard to study and practice. So he asked someone who was at the top of his class, what's your regimen look like? How do you practice? How do you schedule in the practice time? And the person who he notes now has Grammys and was obviously successful and made for it, almost seemed bewildered at his question because he didn't understand what he meant. He just sat down in the morning and played or practiced or studied. He didn't even view it as that. Whereas Mark was viewing it as work and as almost unbearable. So it was at that time he was like, wow, okay, this isn't for me. And he actually quit. Fast forward, Mark discusses when he's at a conference later in his life for blogging. So he's writing 10 to 20 page responses and articles, and is known for it, has a good following. And he finds out that someone comes up to him and says, wow, this is just fantastic. I love your work. I'm curious, what's your routine like? How do you sit down and write? And he mentions he had that click in his mind where he goes, wow, this is that same occurrence as I had in music school, except now I'm the person. Because he didn't understand. He just sat down and wrote. It's just what he did. And it was something that came natural to him. And he realized in that moment that, wow, he had really found his niche. That click happened in his brain where he realized he is now the expert. So I love that. And we're on to our last thought, number 6. And that is the idea that your identity is actually created from your emotion and not so much logic. So they discuss, Tom and Mark, how our identities really are just a creation of our experiences, stacked on experiences, and we are layers of the things that have happened to us in our lives. And that's what we take away from them to create who we are on a daily basis. The twist there, which honestly I just hadn't thought about before, is that the takeaway from the experiences is really our emotional, how we felt about them and how we feel about them now, versus the logical conclusions that you could draw. They note some more trauma or abuse early in life, but you could also be, say, from a relationship that ended. A logical conclusion could be drawn that this ended and it was for the best, and this is why, and this is what I've learned. But if you left that with a feeling of, inferiority, or you were betrayed, or you were insecure about it after leaving it, that's really what you're attaching to that memory, not so much the logical conclusion that someone from the outside looking in would apply. So it's just a really interesting thought about when we look at our identities and we look at things we might want to change, or we might want to get to the bottom of why we feel a certain way. It's not so much, you can't look at it from a logical lens. You need to go ahead and note the experience and then put down in words, how do you feel about that? Like, how have you been carrying how you felt about it? And then now being in new space, your full identity now, how does it make you feel now? And really the way to make progress, I guess this is the overarching point I took away from it, is to reframe your emotion tied to the experience, as opposed to just using logic and carrying on, because that won't stick. Just using logic and not changing your emotion, that emotion's always going to, 10 times out of 10, stick through past. So I really liked that. So those were 6 points. Obviously, this is a great video. Highly recommend it. But in addition, it really was more, a lot of the reviews and a lot of the content I do tend to be like specifics I'm going to take away and walk into my life with. This one really was more thought-provoking. It's more philosophical, I would say. So once again, if you're returning, thanks for coming back. Leave your comments below. I'd really like to talk about this one in particular. But yeah, first timer, hit the subscribe. And I want to leave you with one ending thought that I just really impacted me. And it was, this wasn't one that was made, it was one I took away. It was, when is it giving up versus when is it moving on, letting an identity die, and exploring and finding your new way or your new path. The reason I mentioned that is, I mentioned earlier Mark's story about how he realized it was time to quit music school, and then eventually he found a new path, which obviously was right for him. But at least my own beliefs and a lot of the content I consume and things I write myself talk about persistence and not giving up and trying, and that success will come through the patience and effort over time. So it makes you wonder, at what point in time do you say this is enough, or do you fight past through and just keep going? And when do you know that success will be on the other side of you giving up, or success will be on the other side of you pursuing through these thoughts that you're never going to make it? This makes me think of all the countless actors or entrepreneurs you hear that tried 1,000 times and then they eventually hit it. Should they have quit and found something else? I don't know the answer, but it's something that I took away, and I'm going to be probably thinking a lot about for the next couple weeks. And who knows, it might go away, it might come back. But yeah, it just really has me wondering, when is it right? I imagine it's a deeply personal and individual and situational decision to give up and move on, or to persist through. Thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate it. We'll be coming back with more content.